of the new guidance. Okay, recording's now started. Okay, so as I said this morning, what I'm going to briefly go through with you is the new Welsh Government Performance Development Review Guidance. So it is a briefing session. It's not designed to be a training. It's just to outline for you what the main changes are in the guidance. I'm sure many of you have had a look at that already since it was published at the end of March, and it may feel very different, but I think what I want to assure you is that a lot of the differences come in the language and the terminology rather than the process. So I'll be giving you an overview of the key changes between the new PDR guidance and the old performance management guidance that Welsh Government had, two separate versions, so one for head teachers and one for teachers. What I will say is that if you saw the correspondence from Welsh Government, there is no set date for implementation by schools of this guidance. So the correspondence from Welsh Government stated that schools will be able to engage with the revised guidance at a time and in a way most effective for them. I've already mentioned that we have got a regional performance management policy currently in place. As a result of that, the new guidance being published, this is going to be reviewed this term. So I'm in the process of looking at that and updating and reviewing that. And then we'll undertake a full consultation with trade unions with a view to circulate that to schools for adoption in the autumn term. So our advice would be that you continue under the current policy in the current cycle that you're in, and implement this new guidance in the autumn term when the new policy will be in place. If I could just ask everybody to keep themselves on mute if possible, thank you. So I'm delivering a number of briefing sessions to provide an overview of the changes. So we've got these sessions for head teachers. I've also delivered sessions to school improvement partners, given their role in head teacher performance management and in supporting schools as well, and have delivered some sessions to governors as well, with recordings being available for governors on the governor's website. So if you do have governors on your head teacher performance management panel who you think would benefit from attending that, they can access that recording via the website. And then more in-depth sessions on the process will be delivered as part of the usual professional learning programme from the autumn, and they'll be bookable via the professional learning calendar as per the current sessions are on effective performance management. The slides will also be made available, and there is a link to the guidance on this slide, which also includes a link to some case studies on how the PDR process is or will be implemented in other schools. So just some key changes really, and what, like I said earlier, the key message is that there are no major changes to the process itself. So it is still an annual process with a meeting to review progress and set new priorities. There's been no changes to the school teacher appraisal regulations, so those statutory requirements do remain. There is still a statutory requirement to undertake the process with all teachers within your school. What the guidance does is bring arrangements in line with the developments that have happened in school improvement and professional learning, and it's about aiming to support the profession to meet the current challenges and ensure that all learners achieve their potential. So I've got a few bullet points on the slide there about what those main changes are. Obviously, there is a clear change in what the process is now being called. So like I said, some of the biggest changes are in the language and the terminology. So we've moved away from the terminology performance management to professional development review. And you'll see on a slide that I'm on the next slide, I sort of outline what those key changes are in the terminology and what things are called. There's now one guidance document for all practitioners. So Welsh Government refer to practitioners throughout their guidance document, and that when they refer to a practitioner, they mean anyone covered by the professional standards. So this would be your teachers, any senior leadership team members who are qualified teachers, including head teachers, and also now teaching assistants. So previously there wasn't a guidance document on performance management published by Welsh Government for teaching assistants, and there used to be a separate one for teachers and head teachers. So everything's been brought into one guidance now, and the inclusion of TAs is probably one of the biggest changes. When we develop the regional policy, though, what we're aiming to do is we'll include all staff in that policy rather than having one which is just for teachers and teaching assistants, because we want to ensure that all support staff as well are included in that. Nobody's been excluded from the performance management process. The focus now of the process is more around continuous professional development as well. So there is a shift in that focus from assessment. So the focus has been shifted from agreeing and reviewing priorities and objectives in the context of the school development plan to supporting practitioners to continuously develop themselves through reflection, collaboration and innovation. It doesn't mean that the SDP doesn't feature. It's still an important document in the process, but there's just a much clearer focus on the development of the individual. There's also the changes highlight the principle that the individual should own their process and drive it with the support of their PDR partner. So it is the PDR partner now is what currently known as the appraiser. So there is much greater focus on that, and also a focus on the use of the professional standards and the learning organisation principles, which is in line with the developments in school improvement and professional learning. So there's a much greater focus on those elements. So this slide just provides you with an overview of how the terminology has changed. So all the same elements really are there, but the language has been updated to sort of demonstrate that collaborative nature of the process and the greater focus on professional development. So you've got obviously the title of it. So we've moved from performance management to professional development review, or what I'll be referring to as PDR throughout the session this morning. So that will now become a PDR policy, so the professional development review policy rather than performance management. At the moment, you'll be using setting objectives. These will be moving to development priorities. The appraiser and the appraisal panel are now PDR partner, PDR panel. So as you can see, that use of the word partner is really demonstrating that collaborative approach. Currently, you'll probably use separate templates for a statement of objective, a professional learning plan and the practice development and review record. And under this guidance, there's a recommendation just to have an overarching professional development plan, which we will obviously, as we do currently, provide templates for with the policy. Monitoring is now referred to as reflecting on progress, and the appraisal review meeting is now referred to as that annual PDR review meeting, with the appraisal statement being a review summary. So, like I said, all of those elements are still there, but they're just called something different, and they've just got a slightly different slant on the way that they'll be implemented. So on the slide here is an overview of the process. You can see it's still the same cyclical process, and the diagram summarises that review cycle and the role of the PDR partner in supporting that practitioner to agree priorities, monitor and reflect on their progress using their professional development plan. But as you see, there's still that planning element. There's still what they're still referring to as monitoring in this diagram, but that reflection on progress, so the ongoing reflection throughout the year, that professional dialogue, feedback, professional support, which I'm sure you're all already implementing. And then you still have the review. I know in practice, in the majority of schools, review and planning tends to come into sort of one meeting where you review the previous year and then you plan for the following year with agreeing those development priorities. So you're still going to be doing that cyclical process on an annual basis. That hasn't changed. One thing that is new that you'll see in the guidance are the introduction of values. So you can see from these that shift in focus on the ownership of that PDR process sitting with the practitioner. And I think traditionally, a lot of schools probably have moved away from that traditional element, but traditionally, performance management has been something that's been maybe seen as being driven by management within the school, and it's a process that has to be undertaken, whereas actually this new guidance is reflecting the best practice that you see now in performance management across industries, not just education, across other industries as well, in that the ownership needing to be with the individual sitting with that practitioner, and a much greater emphasis on a collaborative approach. So it's much more people focused rather than paper focused, I would say. And it's important to note that that professional learning journey does need to link, though, with the school priorities as well. So it's not, it is very individually focused, but there needs to be a link into obviously what the needs of the school are as well. So it's about that affiliation. So it's making sure that the individuals develop their ownership and their connection to professional development, and making that sort of just an integral part of their review of their journey through their career as well. It's about agency, so that they actually are provided with the time and the space to engage with and reflect on and map out their professional learning journey, which then it will in turn help them meet the needs of learners, and that supportive culture and environment within the school. And also setting ambitions for professional growth by use of the professional standards. So there is a much greater focus on the professional standards through this new guidance as well. So I think one of the probably the bigger challenges for you as head teachers is that increased focus within the guidance on that provision of time for practitioners to engage with the PDR process. And we all know that time is precious within schools. And you can see that through the second value. There is reference to making sure that all practitioners have that time and space to engage with. How that operates within each school will be dependent on what works for you. But obviously, with teaching assistants being included in the guidance, it does potentially increase the amount of time that needs to be found to ensure that staff are able to engage with this process effectively. But like I said, I think most of you are already very active in providing staff with time to work towards objectives and to undertake PL regardless of their role. So just to go through the general purpose of this PDR process, the idea is that it should support practitioner well-being, professional development, and continuous reflection and review. So this encourages practitioners to have that affiliation and that agency in achieving that in the school vision, and their role in that achievement of the school vision, and in supporting the delivery of the school development plan within that learning environment. So as part of that, the guidance asks schools to ensure that there is investment in practitioner inquiry and their pedagogic skills that would enable them then to be that innovative professional learners within a culture of inquiry. So this approach to professional development review is promoting both an individual and collective means to realising the four purposes within the Curriculum for Wales. And the key attributes of schools which are successfully realising the Curriculum for Wales are described in the school improvement guidance. So it's about the guidance refers to the fact that underpinning the process should be that culture of trust and an expectation that practitioners take a responsibility for their own development. So it really will be about encouraging your staff within your schools to really actively engage in the PDR process, to really think themselves about what their development priorities will be, how the best, to be really reflecting on what their progress are against that as well. So it's about making sure that they, that they're very actively involved in that process as well. So from the values, there are also some key principles that have been identified as essential to effective PDR. So you've got the use of the professional standards as a framework for continuous improvement. Like I said, there is much greater focus on using the standards to support the individual in the planning, development, and review of their professional learning journey, and linking those descriptors that you find in the standards to their professional practice and professional learning plans. So this doesn't mean using every descriptor. It's just about actually making sure that the professional standards are reflected on when you are setting those development priorities, linking those standards into what you're looking at and seeing how they fit. So how practitioners engage with the standards will very much depend on where the individual is in their career and what they want to achieve. So it's about making sure that they are included in those conversations. There's also the principle of it being an entitlement for all practitioners who work in one school for one complete term or 2 consecutive half terms. So there is an expectation that that under this guidance that all practitioners will be having the PDR process if they are in your school for at least one term. There's a principle about it celebrating strengths and recognising progress towards goals in order to promote further development. So obviously the more that that sort of success is celebrated, then the more that there is that engagement as well, and there being that culture of mutual trust and respect. So you can see this collaborative principle really coming through these principles as well. It is an integral element of team learning and collaboration. So there is much, like I said, there's more of a focus on that collaborative approach and ownership by the individual in that supportive environment. So it does place duties on the practitioners to take ownership and responsibility. And the PDR process then is a supporting mechanism for that. And it's linked in to a commitment to career-long professional growth and supporting their professional learning journey, being guided by individual reflection and support from peers within the school or also from other schools as well. So there's a number of other principles which you'll see within the guidance, but that just gives you a general overview of what the main principles are. So your role as a head teacher in the implementation of the new PDR process, like I said, it's not massively different to your role under the current performance management as well. So you're still required to provide an annual summary to the governing body on the operation and the effectiveness of the PDR process within your school. So this focuses, like I said, on the operation of that PDR. So making sure that the governors are satisfied that the process is being met and that people are having that PDR process, and the effectiveness of the review procedures and any, the professional learning that's being undertaken by staff within your school. It's your responsibility to ensure that every practitioner has a PDR partner allocated to them who have the appropriate skills, knowledge and behaviours to sort of be able to undertake that role. And the guidance does place some responsibility on head teachers to create what it refers to as conditions to support practitioners to be able to carry out their role in the PDR process. So it's about allocating time during directed time for professional development discussions to take place. And where we refer to directed time, obviously that's teachers, but with TAs, this would be within their contracted hours. The guidance encourages head teachers to create a culture of collaboration, trust and transparency. So where ideally practitioners are willing to share all or part of their professional development plan with colleagues in order to support shared PL and collegiate approach to development as well. So it's about sharing that best practice. And I'm aware that some schools across the region already have sort of professional learning sessions where you might use your sort of staff meetings to share that element as well. So, the more that there is that sharing of professional learning, what people are working towards and actually what people have learned, obviously, the more you're sharing that best practice across your school as well. So I've made reference to the PDR partner, which again, as I said, this is what you currently refer to as, they are your current appraisers. So the guidance does state that the PDR partners of teachers must be must have qualified teacher status. And then the PDR partners of teaching assistants will either generally be teachers or HLTAs where possible. As a general rule, across general practice in performance management, it's usually the individual's line manager who will undertake the role. So that's the principle I generally advise across schools if that's possible. You probably find that in secondary schools, your heads of department are probably undertaking performance management currently for their team members, and it will be a very similar sort of process really under the new so the new guidance. So there's not really any change in terms of, there's no requirement for you to change who the PDR partners are for individuals currently. For the head teacher then, you have a PDR partner, a PDR panel of the governing body. So normally that's currently made up of 2 governors and 1 or 2 local authority representatives, who are within this region. The SIP is the local authority representative, and that would remain the same. So there's no intention for that to change as well for your own PDR panels. With regards to the SIP being the LA representative, as I'm sure you're all aware, they are a full member of the panel, and they should therefore be present for all stages of the sort of main formal processes. So they should be present at those review meetings. So the role of the PDR partner or the PDR panel is to support the practitioner to agree priorities, monitor and reflect on progress and that's through the use of the professional development plan. So your PDR partner would work with the individual to agree your development priorities, bearing in mind that importance on autonomy and choice in the process. So you want to try and ensure that those individuals are really actively involved in what their development priorities would be, and maybe are coming up with those ideas themselves. And you want them to be obviously realistic and manageable while taking into account the practitioner's existing knowledge and expertise. So providing practitioners with the opportunity to have that influence is actually quite a powerful motivator for them to really be engaged in the process. You also, PDR partners are expected to agree with the individual when and how professional support will take place. So I'll refer to professional support. That's a new sort of reference within the guidance, and I will cover that later on in the session. There is a statutory requirement for the PDR partner to observe the practitioner at least once during the review cycle, and that's exactly the same as now. There's already that statutory requirement for teachers anyway. And the annual professional development review meeting then as well, that takes place between the practitioner and their PDR partner. And that's obviously at the end of the review cycle. So again, that's no different to the current process with your appraisal review. With there being much greater focus on the individual and that sort of element of ownership, obviously they play quite, they should be playing a large role in their own PDR processes. So it does require practitioners to reflect on their successes, their strengths and areas for further growth within the context of the professional standards, also within the context of the progression of their learners and the school's development priorities and what their role is within that. So in addition, then you would also be expecting those who've got a leadership role within school to be reflecting on the relevant standards to their specific area of responsibility. So I'm sure you all are aware with the professional standards, there are different levels. So it's about making sure that you are looking at the correct one based on the role of that individual. You're expecting them to identify development priorities, which are currently referred to as objectives, and that those priorities then are discussed and finalised with the support of the PDR partner. And they're used then to develop an individual professional learning journey in line with the National Professional Learning Entitlement. So as part of those discussions, they would be asked to be thinking about the success criteria and also what impact they may expect to see of their development priorities. Obviously, you'd be looking for them to actively pursue and reflect on their professional learning journey, supported by their PDR partner, and if needed, revising any priorities. So you are asking them to sort of instigate and engage and contribute to professional dialogue, that reflection, inquiry, professional learning, and at the end of the cycle then evaluate their progress against the development priorities that were set, and reflect on that progress as part of an evaluative conversation with the PDR partner. And finally, what you've got there at the end of there is about contribute to the sharing of learning and effective practice across the school, which is what I just mentioned earlier. You really want to encourage the sharing of that best practice. Okay, so just looking at the development priorities, like I said, this is the new terminology for the objectives, and the expectation under the guidance is that the practitioner, like I said, has much more involvement in identifying their development priorities, which are then discussed and finalised with the support of the PDR partner. Now, there's a chance that this is probably happening in schools already, but it is just making sure that they are actively involved in that. So it's about sort of trying to make sure that you're motivating the individual to stay engaged, and in planning and reviewing their development priorities, they should be taking responsibility for working with their PDR partners so that they're reflecting on what is my current knowledge, what are my current skills and behaviours, and what's my current experience, and then identifying the needs of their learners, and or whole school priorities that they may be involved in, setting out then what they intend to learn, develop or do differently. So these are the stages in sort of looking at those in developing those development priorities, and outlining what professional learning is required to achieve that. So it's quite a staged approach there. and you'll be looking at encouraging practitioners to self-evaluate against those professional standards, and linking their professional development to those standards then as well. So the new guidance also allows practitioners and their PDR partner to identify and agree shorter term development priorities or longer term ones that might require more than one academic year to be achieved. So we do work on an annual cycle, but there would be nothing to prevent you setting a sort of PDR development priority that it would run for less than a year. So the deadline for meeting that is less than a year, or actually if this is something that's likely to run over a couple of years, that you could actually extend the amount of time that PDR development priority is set for. So I've mentioned the professional development plan previously, and like I said, that replaces the documents that are currently used to record objectives, the professional learning plan and the practice review and development record. And the guidance highlights that practitioners should be encouraged to try new approaches offered by professional learning that they undertake, and that together with reflection on the outcomes will maximise the impact of professional learning on learners' progress and the practitioner's professional growth. So the professional development plan enables that professional learning and their reflection on the outcomes to be recorded. So it's a live document that you'll be expecting them to use throughout the year to do that reflection, to keep a record of any professional learning undertaken. There is reference to use of the professional learning passport in there. I know that many schools don't really like the professional learning passport, and the general feedback I've heard is that it can be quite clunky. And I know many schools have therefore created sort of their own systems in order to be able to capture that information. So, you know, it's only mandatory the use of the professional learning passport for NQT. So if school want to use another system to enable practitioners to keep that record that works better for your school, then there's no mandatory requirement for people to be using the professional learning passport other than those NQTs. And they're also expected to keep a record of any factors that may have affected their performance in relation to those development priorities. So, you know, it's about those links into the school becoming a learning organisation and trying to create that culture of that collaboration, transparency, and trust, which I mentioned earlier, where people are happy to share sort of elements of their professional development plan in order to support that shared professional learning and that collegiate approach to development. And that's pretty relevant then as well if you've got an individual priority that links to maybe a team or whole school priority. Okay, so I referred to professional support earlier, and like I said, this is a new sort of section in the guidance, but I would say this is something that happens in practice quite a lot across our region anyway. So it's about actually providing in-school professional support for all practitioners so that they're able to actively engage with and reflect on that, on their development priorities. But actually you may also be looking at professional support externally as well. So it's working collaboratively with others to support their professional learning and generate information about progress so that they can monitor and adapt their learning. And it's that continuous process which can involve peers within the school but also beyond the school. And we do a lot of school to school work within the region. So again, like I said, this isn't something that's necessarily new, but it is a new section within the guidance. So the expectation is that the school will provide opportunities for practitioners throughout the year for this professional support to take place by allowing those practitioners and groups to reflect, to review progress, and then consider the effectiveness of their practice. So this is referred to as almost that continuous feedback loop where practitioners have a safe space to consider with others any aspect of work that they maybe need further development in, but equally you can use it to share something that's worked really well and may be of use to others. As head teachers, clearly it's likely to be that your discussions are more likely to be aligned with peers within maybe your cluster and beyond, any mentors maybe that you've been allocated, your SIP, and governors as well. So reflecting on progress, this is the current sort of monitoring process under the previous guidance, and how progress is reflected on and sustained needs to be agreed between the practitioner and their PDR partner at the start of the cycle. So again, that's something that is happening at the moment. It's not a new part, and the type of reflection that takes place will obviously then vary according to what the development priorities are. So it needs to be relevant to the development priorities set. So there's much more focus now on reflection through professional dialogue and constructive feedback in order to reflect on that progress. So holding some feedback sessions to reflect on what's gone well, what are the successes or any specific areas for further development would be an important part of that sort of reflection process throughout the year. I mentioned earlier that there are some case studies on the Welsh Government website. And some of those case studies indicate that some schools hold those feedback and reflection sessions on a termly basis with staff. And you've also got those informal mid-year reviews where it would be good practice to have that sort of professional dialogue, because these are sort of the key elements of reflecting on that progress towards the development priorities and enabling them to keep a record. So any reflective activity would be undertaken by the PDR partner or a colleague who's got the skills, knowledge and behaviours to carry out that reflective activity effectively. And it's about really trying to encourage the practitioners within your schools to take those opportunities. Yes, you've got your formal opportunities throughout the year, but actually let's take some opportunities with colleagues for some impromptu professional conversations in seeking the informal and constructive feedback as well. And then the final part of the process then is that annual professional development review meeting. Again, this is something that's already happening through your appraisal review. Not much has changed really. So there's still a requirement for 10 school days notice. There is still the expectation that the individual has reflected throughout the year and they need to share those reflections with the PDR partner at least 5 school days in advance of the review meeting. The terminology within the guidance is demonstrates a bit of a move away from the previous process of assessing the extent the objectives have been met and determining whether there's been successful overall performance to more of a summary approach, as you can see outlined on the slide. So it's about summarising the activity of the year by reflecting that progress against development priorities, looking at the standards, the benefits and the application of professional learning, the achievement of learners and any factors which may have had an impact on the above. So whilst the language is different in essence, you are still assessing the progress made against the development priorities agreed. And then a PDR summary, which is currently referred to as the appraisal statement, is then produced within 10 school days of the meeting to enable the individual then to sort of have that summary of the discussion and the conclusions reached. So you still share that with them and then they also have the opportunity to add their own comments to the summary. And once that document's been finalised, then the expectation is that you as the head teacher would keep the summary somewhere confidential within the school for at least 3 years after the next summary review has been finalised. So final slide really is just to give you that overview for the timescales for the implementation of this guidance from a regional perspective. Like I said at the beginning, I'm in the process of reviewing the policy, and the intention is that it will be updated and consulted with unions by the end of the summer term. The policy will then be circulated to governing bodies for adoption in the autumn term, and our recommendation is that schools then implemented it in the autumn term when I believe most schools will be sort of starting their new cycles. So that is a very brief whistle-stop tour of the process. I will stop the recording now, but I'm available, like I said, the session's on until 11 o'clock, so I'm available now, which will give you an opportunity to ask any questions should you have any.